So we themed it about how we made Australia just a little bit more joyful. And to give you some context around that, I think it's worth going back. And we're going to go back in time a little bit, then we're going to go way back to come forward again. But the first little bit back, most people remember just a couple of years ago, is sort of to get in touch with what was going on for Australia's most loved food brand and the people who loved it, which are the people of Australia. And if you think about, I love metaphors, and I want you to think about relationships as the metaphor. So think about this relationship as like a long-term marriage, right? It's stood the test of time. People have been through it a lot. There's a great familiarity involved. There's a kind of deep, deep affection that's involved as well. But sometimes, I've been married 10 years, 10 years going strong. Sometimes there's a kind of apathy that creeps into your relationship as well, where maybe you just take the other for granted, or maybe you get a little bit disgruntled because the other's not quite surprising you the way you'd love them to. And there's a sense of that in consumers' relationship with Cadbury. It's sort of like, I love you, I really love you, there's a deep connection here, but where's my trip to Paris? When was the last time you bought me flowers? It's kind of, we weren't quite doing that for people. There was a predictability about it that felt like a nice kind of old, your favourite jumper, but really what we needed to provide was a bit of a new outfit. And so we set ourselves the challenge of putting some spark back into the relationship so that people felt like that love was really re-energised and reconnected. And, as marketers and creatives and strategists, of course, we started talking to the people that mattered most about what was going on. And invariably with brands like Cadbury that are iconic, and it is a genuinely iconic brand. That word's thrown around a little too easily. Cadbury's an icon. There's an opportunity to sort of transcend what you stand for as a product and to define culture. And really that is the onus, and that is the requirement for brands of that stature to step forward and say, let's lead culture. So a lot of our inquiry with consumers was around, well, what's going on in Australia? And post-GFC, what we found was, people were weighed down. The world's a pretty grim place, and it's at a sense of stability. Maybe it's not as grim as it was in 2008, and the share market hit 3,500, and everyone's going, oh my God, is the value of my house going to halve? What's going to happen? Was a sense of being burdened by what was going on. Well, we've come out of that, but there's this unease still about, are we through it? What's happening in Europe? Is America? Can we believe the story? What about this China engine? So there's sort of this sense of unease still, and people are kind of burdened by that. And, as Australians, we haven't experienced that very often. Even when you go back to the recession we had to have in 1991, it was a different sense about it, right? Because as Australians, we've got this natural sense of optimism and joy. And, we're the lucky country after all. And this is how we define ourselves. We're naturally optimistic. We see things glass half full, or glass and a half full, as we would say. And we thought there's a tension there that's really interesting, because optimism and joy are self-propelling systems, right? The more it's self-affirming, the more you express it, the more others receive it, the more they give it back to you, and it kind of creates a virtuous cycle. Right, so we really felt like there was the opportunity for the brand was to stand up and take a stand. Take a stand for optimism and joy. Metaphor, think about the start of the Olympics and the nations are all marching out onto the arena. And there's that person at the front, great honour, who's carrying the flag, right? So if you think about carrying the flag for national optimism, we took the opportunity as, okay, that's Cadbury's role, to be the flag bearer for optimism for Australia at the front, and increasingly in the world, because it's a global brand. And we thought, well, how do we do that? And that it's okay, all well and good to say that. Optimism, joy, happiness, they're all big words, right? And lots of brands use them. The key to connecting authentically is that it needs to feel like it's really coming from the brand, from a genuine place, and it's not just something you've invented lately and said, oh, well, this seems like the best thing to say today. Okay, well, let's step forward. So there's a lot of inquiry into, well, is that, we've been talking about joy for a while, but is joy really true to what Cadbury stands for? And to get a sense of that, I'm going to take you on a kind of more detailed history. We're going to go right back to the start. And I think you'll see at the end of that there is a generosity and a joyfulness about this brand that's consistent, and was right there when it was founded. Interesting quirk of Cadbury, it's a sort of Commonwealth company in the main. In Australia, in New Zealand, in India, less so India, in the UK, every country believes Cadbury is theirs. It's because it's managed to create a really intimate connection with the community in each of those environments. However, it is a British brand. It was founded by the Cadbury brothers in the Industrial Revolution. And that image is up there because I want you to get a sense of what life was like in that time. And it wasn't fun, right? There was no sort of coffee areas with fruit bowls and nice little breakouts and social zones for people. You went to work at 8, you went down in a coal mine and you got dirty and you earned money for your family. And you were spat up and chewed out, and you're lucky if you're still kicking around at 30 years old.
It's like me in advertising.
Right, yeah. Longevity. It was a tough place, right? It was a tough environment. And in that environment, these guys created this place called Bourneville. Pop quiz. Does anyone know where Bourneville is? Show of hands. Yep, up the back. Correct. Right. So Birmingham is sort of near London, right?
Near France.
Yeah. It's a pretty big centre, Birmingham. It's a lovely place. These guys took themselves out of London, they went to Birmingham, and they built a system, a community that had things like cricket pitches, it had swimming pools, it had daycare for kids, it had higher education facilities for employees, and it was coined this factory in the garden concept. Now, can you imagine what it was like to observe that from that time, and how revolutionary that would have been? And what an incredible act of kind of vision and generosity was involved. And it came back to the founding beliefs of the business, which is about there is enough abundance and there's enough in the world. What we've got to do is share it. And if you share it, we'll come back to you. And these changes were put in place, and this place was created on the belief that if you've got great, happy workers, they're going to give you better products, they're going to be more innovative, and ultimately you're going to get a better output from the system. And it was the foundation for sort of propelling the business forward. And around that time, in the first 10 years of Bourneville, Cadbury Dairy Milk was created. And there's an implicit generosity in Cadbury Dairy Milk. It's not a glass of full cream milk, it's a glass and a half of full cream milk. I think that motive kind of sums up the inherent generosity in the brand. Some really interesting facts about Cadbury. When Bourneville was built, there were incredible changes made in the way chocolate was processed, such that there was a better quality product at the end of it, and it could be produced against the competitors at about a third of the cost. So they changed the system. And instead of going, oh, well, that's great, okay, we charge this today and we make this margin, now we can make this sort of margin, why don't we put it all in the bank? Those savings were reinvested in price. And they took the price of chocolate down from here, it was more than halved, right? It was this idea of actually, no, we've got to democratise it so everyone can enjoy it. And those sorts of decisions have played out not just in the genesis of the company, but also even in this market. In the late 1980s, the mid-1980s, inflation's running rampant, commodity prices are on the boom, kind of sound familiar. Cocoa price was going up, and the business had a fantastic hedge against that increase that was about 2 years. And instead of banking the margin, at that time in this country, and some of you may remember this, I don't remember it, the weight of the block was taken from 200 gram to 250 gram without changing the price. And that propelled an incredible period of growth for Cadbury. That in conjunction with pretty much putting anything you possibly put into a block of chocolate, we've done it. So there was this massive burst in innovation, and there was this wonderful guy, Julius Sumner Miller, who I grew up with and thought was the coolest scientist on earth. That combination really propelled Cadbury forward to the iconic status that it holds today in an incredibly dominant market position, or strong position. So I hope you're getting a sense of there's a generosity here in this franchise, and there's a desire to spread joy and for others to enjoy that and to create a virtuous system. And I think it's fair to say, the brand's also got a long history of creating compelling communications. that are inherently joyful, you know. No one can kind of, you know, Gorilla's amazing, right? You watch Gorilla, still to this day, as a business, we hold it up and say, there aren't many pieces of copy that make you feel the visceral joy that copy does. It actually makes you feel joy. It's a very hard benchmark to set yourself. I think we're doing that now with some of the work you're going to see as well. Julius Sumner Miller, I thought he was cool, right? He was my childhood. There's something incredibly joyful about that. Show of hands who remembers the guy. He was great. You know, you go back and watch History Wheels, I thought, oh, there's maybe 4 or 5 of these ads. There's like 20 of these things over and over again, these little experiments. It went on for ages. And then wouldn't be nice. I mean, again, just an inherently joyful, optimistic, upbeat campaign. Our challenge was to kind of reinvent and create a new platform and to take the brand forward. And sometimes on the journey, glass and half full is a great example. You know, actually, when you produce something like Gorilla, you set yourself a high benchmark. It's pretty high to jump over every time, right? And I don't think anything that followed really lived up to that expectation. And in the effort to live up, sometimes you forget that actually your brand and the product needs to be at the centre of your idea. And if you don't have that, there's a disconnect that happens. So we set ourselves the challenge of creating a new platform where the brand and the product is right at the heart of the idea. It only works because of that. It had to be tight enough to connect everything. Otherwise, you end up with campaign, 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 and they all kind of work as individual elements, but there's no sort of halo impact back. So how do we create something that works across a whole and feels like it all hangs together and is contributing to each other to create this halo effect and momentum, not just within the individual executions, but for everything else that's involved with it, right? But within that, how do you enable enough stretch that it can work for an individual brief? And when you've got a brand like Cadbury or CDM, there's a fair bit in your portfolio and there's a lot of tasks you've got to cover. So how do you create an idea that gives us that tightness, so it feels connected, but also the stretch to work across multiple campaigns and elements? And most importantly, a platform to enable the brand to step up and live its purpose in the world. And we say our mission is not just to make chocolate, but to make the world a more joyful place. And when you say that, you've got to do it. It's not just kind of communicate it, but you've got to be it. You've got to live it, and you've actually got, people have got to feel that as a result of what we do.